Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. My name's James Copley. Today, we're going to be previewing the Sunderland versus Millwall clash in the Championship at the Stadium of Light this weekend. We're going to be tackling it from a Sunderland perspective, though. So today, I'm joined by my colleague Jason Jones. Jace, how you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. Not too bad. About as well as you can be on a Tuesday morning,
That's it. Still a fair bit to talk about, though, Jace. Run us through the agenda for today.
Yeah, well, I think obviously the main thing, we're going to be looking at the need for Sunderland to bounce back. Obviously, a couple of disappointing results prior to the international break. And then we're also going to be talking about a couple of potential injury concerns. Dennis Cirkin and Trey Hume, namely, both players having sort of dropped out of their respective international camps over the past week. We'll be looking at what Reg might do to sort of combat any prospective changes at the back. Possible options at fullback for Sunderland in a game that I'm sure you'll agree, James, it could potentially represent quite a tricky task for Sunderland. Obviously, Millwall themselves pushing for a playoff place, managed by a former Sunderland boss as well, which we always know is a bit of a banana skin. Alex Neil is at the helm at the Den at the present moment in time. All in all, probably going to be an interesting one for Sunderland this weekend.
Shall we start with Hume? That was the news yesterday, wasn't it? That Trey Hume had withdrawn from international duty with the Northern Ireland. Let's go with that, shall we?
Yeah, let's let's start there. So as you say, Trey Hume, he played the first game of Northern Ireland's international break. And then prior to the second game, he sort of dropped out of the camp. The word from Michael O'Neill, the Northern Ireland boss, being that he sort of aggravated a hip injury. Now, obviously, James, I think you probably know a little bit more about this than me. I mean, what's the situation there? Is this something that someone should be particularly concerned about? Is it looking as if he's going to be out for a little while, or is there a possibility that he could still feature on Saturday against Millwall?
Yeah, I think the comments are definitely a concern. Obviously, we don't know the extent to which Hume has aggravated this hip injury. I think O'Neill's saying that he's been playing with it for a while at Sunderland. That is a concern that he hasn't really been training. That's sort of news to us, isn't it? We weren't aware of that. If he's been getting through games, then that does provide a little bit of hope, I guess. I suspect something like this will have been a little bit of a gentleman's agreement between Sunderland and Northern Ireland. I imagine he's played one game and they've sent him back. I think that was probably agreed beforehand, but we can't know for sure. I think Trey Hume's the type of player where he's just desperate to play football all of the time. So it is definitely a worry. I think there is an outside shot that he could play against Millwall. It wouldn't surprise me if he did. Obviously, we're only on Tuesday now, so I think obviously Lebris will have a bit more information about that on Thursday. But I couldn't say he's definitely out, and I couldn't say he's definitely in either. I think I know that's sitting on the fence and not very helpful to anybody. But yeah, it's definitely one to watch. And with Cirkin's injury as well, we're not entirely sure he's definitely going to be out, but I think we can say with a relative degree of certainty that's more likely than Hume, given the type of injury. It looked to be a calf, didn't it, against Coventry City. So again, Lebris will be asked about that on Thursday, but I suspect he'll be out. So changing two of that back line is going to be tricky potentially. So yeah, lots to discuss tactically, formation wise, and the options Lebris has, I think, as well, Jace. So yeah, all eyes to Thursday really, but I mean, Hume's been ever present, hasn't he, this season, and it would be a blow if he wasn't there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think obviously he's saying that he's an ever present, but to a certain extent, it's kind of being forced, from a Sunderland perspective. They don't really have another right back. And it's something that we've spoken about quite a lot. Obviously, Luke O'Nien is an option. He can go out there. He can play there. The problem you've got there is that Sunderland, at the present moment in time, don't have a wealth of fit centre-backs. Obviously, Dan Ballard, we're not expecting back until probably a couple of 3 weeks after the international break. So you're probably looking mid-April for him. Adji Elise's season is over after that injury that he sustained against Stoke City. Obviously, Jensen Seelt is back and he's sort of, in and around the squad. But as I think we've sort of alluded to a couple of times in recent weeks, it's a big ask to drop him straight into the starting 11 in a championship match at this present moment in time, bearing in mind how long he was sidelined for with that knee injuries. So, it really does highlight a recurrent concern in Sunderland's squad. And obviously, during the January transfer window, Lebris was very adamant that he felt that he had the options. He felt he had enough depth to sort of deal with any prospective absences over the course of Sunderland's promotion run-in. I don't think, if we're being fair to him, he could have really foreseen the sheer volume of injuries that Sunderland have suffered at the back since then. Since that January transfer window, obviously Ballard, like I say, he's dropped out. Cirkin, as we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, I'm sure, but he's looking doubtful. Hume's a doubt. Elise is, obviously pretty much straight away as soon as he went down against Stoke. We were at that game and we both felt it was going to be a bad one, and it proved to be the case. So, it is a little bit of a quandary for Lebris as to what he does if Hume isn't available at the weekend, because, like I sort of said there, he doesn't have a whole load of options available to him.
Yeah, shall we run through them quickly? I wrote about this on the Sunderland Echo website. So in terms of Millwall keeping a back four, previous managers have shown a little bit of a desire to keep the centre-back pairing together. So obviously Mepham and O'Nien have played a lot of games together. If Lebris wanted the continuity of keeping those two together, you could see Sealt play at right back in the game against Millwall. It isn't his natural position, but he has played there before. That, as you say, is a little bit of a risk and a gamble. He's only just returned from a long knee injury. If Cirkin does miss the game as well, then you could see Lebris wanting to keep that centre-back partnership intact, because then you're only changing two positions instead of three. Ollie Bainbridge is an option. I think that feels unlikely. He can play left back, right back, and centre back. He's impressed for Graham Murphy's under 21 side. I think if he was to come into the team, it would be at left back. But again, I think that's unlikely. He's yet to make his first team debut for Sunderland. He does have some experience playing senior football this season. He was at loan at Kilmarnock, played at Celtic Park. He might be worth a spot on the bench given his versatility in a defensive crisis, but it would be a huge leap of faith. Obviously, the other option is to play Sealt at centre-back and have O'Nien move out to right-back. O'Nien's played a lot of football there. Alan Brown, Jace, I think, could be a potential option at right-back as well if they wanted to go down that road, just because of his experience. I don't know if he's played much there before, but just in terms of his playing style, I think he could definitely sort of do a temporary job there. I think his professionalism, his work rate are key attributes that could go down that side. Those were my thoughts initially, to be honest. But then I think there's also been a few discussions about potentially a back five. So there's a lot to think about.
There is. There really is. The Alan Brown shout is an interesting one because, you mentioned there about potential options. I was sort of going through the Rolodex in my mind of Sunderland's squad, and I was thinking, well,
it's a great word. That is a great word, a Rolodex.
But who could you plug into that gap? And there aren't a lot of options. When you think about Sunderland's wide players, they're all more traditional attacking forces. You know what I mean? They all tend to play on the front foot. You certainly can't imagine. Well, not since that Luton playoff semi-final, but you can't imagine Patrick Roberts at right back, can you really? So it's it really is thin on the ground, and obviously Lebris's hand is going to be forced a little bit as well if Cirkin is out of action, because that necessitates Leo Hjelde playing left back. You would assume, obviously, he would be another option to potentially play in the centre that would then free up O'Nien to go to right back. I think what I would say about Sealt coming back into the side, if that is the way that Sunderland are forced to go, I think that it makes more sense to slot him in at right back and keep that centre-back pairing together. I think that obviously it hasn't been perfect, but I think that for the most part, O'Nien and Mepham have been a really dependable and pretty rock-steady partnership at the back.
And especially given that Leo Hjelde does have a little bit of experience in that defensive unit in recent games. It's not as strange to him than it would have been, say, 2 months ago, because he has played a little bit now.
He has, and to be fair to him as well, I think that even over the course of the two starts that he's had, and I know he then had that sort of untimely setback of his own, but I do think that he was starting to find his feet a little bit. I think that in the initial knock-ins against Sheffield Wednesday, I thought he looked a little bit shaky and a little bit unsure of himself. But I thought that, moving forward from that point onwards, and certainly when he was posted out at left back especially, I thought he did okay. I thought that it was at the Cardiff game that he started at left back, and actually thought he linked quite well with Mundell and Bellingham out on that left side. Obviously it's something that Labris has spoken about quite a lot, hasn't he? That those triangles in wide areas, the need to get the fullback into attacking areas to sort of bring the central midfielder in and to create chances that way. And I thought that Hjelde actually equipped himself pretty well in that regard. So if he were to start left back on Saturday, and obviously we don't know until we hear Labris's comments on Thursday, but I do think it probably safe to assume, or at least postulate, that the Cirkin isn't going to be part of the start 11. So if
I think the other question as well is Hjelde definitely going to be fit? He sounded like he was going to be, but that's another one. And we're doing all this on the proviso that Leo Hjelde is definitely going to be fit. Don't get me wrong, I think he is, but there is still like a little minor question mark around him as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sort of basing that purely on, I think the last press conference that Labris gave, he said he should be available, but obviously. Shoulda, woulda, coulda.
We've heard should be available before, and then they're nowhere to be seen for 3 weeks. So.
Absolutely. So let's like I say, assuming Hjelde is going to be available, I would have no qualms about him starting at left back. It is that question at right back, and again, it's another big if. But if Hume's not available, if Hume's capable of playing, then it kind of negates a lot of this conversation. The one thing I would say is that he hasn't looked like a player who hasn't been training, and he hasn't looked like a player who's been battling a sort of recurring hip injury. I thought that in recent weeks he's looked really good, Trey Hume. He's looked like the Trey Hume that we've grown accustomed to. So in that regard, it came as a bit of a shock to me when Michael O'Neill said that he hasn't been training all that often.
Yeah, his numbers are always really high. You know what you're going to get, don't you? Up and down that right-hand side. He's got a phenomenal tackle on him, as we all know and love. Offensively as well, I think he's really underrated. He's got 7 goal contributions this season, which is the same as Job and Mundell. Obviously, Mundell's been out for a long time. But, that's nearly as many as Patrick Roberts on 8. He's got more than Chris Rigg and Dan Neil. He's a real threat. His crossing's really good. I think he's a leader in the group as well. So it would be a bit of a blow. There's no doubt about that. But yeah, let's just wait and see. And you're right. He hasn't played. I think Sunderland's form has dipped, like, generally, hasn't it? But I don't think he's played. He's not looked like when he's playing that he's had an injury. And I think we spoke to him quite recently, actually, after a game, and you can tell he just wants to play. I actually asked him, are you due a rest? Because it feels like everybody else has had some sort of rest across the season. As you say, a lot of that was necessitated by Sunderland not bringing in fullback cover and competition. But he was just like, no, don't think so. I'll just crack on. And I think he's just like that, isn't he? And I think that's what we all quite like about him. He's a very, very Sunderland right back, isn't he? He's just like solid, dependable, little bit of quality, gets stuck in, always available. And I think that's what we like at this club.
Absolutely. Obviously, we mentioned at the top of the show, a couple of disappointing results for Sunderland leading into this international break. Obviously, the draw against Preston and then that heavy defeat against Coventry, the heaviest of Labris's tenure so far. How important, James, is it that they rediscover some momentum with a good result against Millwall this weekend?
Yeah, they need to get back to winning ways. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, the gloom is setting over the international break, hasn't it? We discussed that in the last podcast. It's Alex Neil, it's Millwall. You want to beat them, an ex-Sunderland manager coming back to the Stadium of Light. You want to get one over on him. He did a really good job at Sunderland, but the way he left still leaves a little bit of a sour taste in Sunderland fans' mouths. And you want to see Labris and his side bounce back, because, as we've mentioned before, getting that momentum back coming into the playoffs is going to be really difficult if this sort of slump continues. You want a reaction. Hopefully, though, with the international break, a couple of players will have been rested. That can sort of refine the form and really attack these last 8 games of the season. And I think as well, sort of repay that home crowd for the faith this season. It's very important. There's been so much good work done between Sunderland and the fans and the team. Lebris always talks about that sort of trifecta and how if they're all working together, it's really powerful, and there's a lot of trust being rebuilt, and you don't want to see performances dip because we know how quickly it can turn. Obviously, finishing 16th in the Championship last season, there's maybe a little doubt creeping in that Sunderland have that within their psyche to go on a bad run again. So I think, yeah, it's hugely important that they turn the tide. I wouldn't say it's critical if they don't get a result against Millwall, obviously, because there's still, there'd be still 7 games to play, and Sunderland's playoff place looks assured. But I think just for the mentality of everybody, it would be good to get a decent performance in there.
Yeah, I think it's a narrative thing more than anything else, isn't it? Like you say, you would assume that Sunderland are relatively secure in that playoff place, but the last thing they will want to do is to head into, a potential game against the likes of a Coventry City, could be a West Brom, could be a Bristol City, could be any number of teams. But the last thing that they'll want to be doing is heading into a game, a 2-legged tie of that magnitude on the back of a really patchy run of form. I think that if they can sort of put to bed some of the doubts that have perhaps arisen in recent weeks with a good performance against Millwall, and then build on that, then I think it would do wonders for the confidence around Wearside writ large, not just in the squad, but also in the fan base. And I do think you're absolutely right. Like, it's so important that both the team and the fan base are aligned in the sense that they both feel that buoyancy heading into a playoff campaign, because as wonderful as the Stadium of Light is, as wonderful as that connection is between the fans and the squad, when things aren't going well, it can also be quite a heavy burden to bear, I feel. I don't think that's a particularly controversial statement, that, when you've got a fan base of that size and of that ardency, really sort of, not feeling it can be a difficult thing to work through for a team. So yeah, I think a good result this weekend, like you say, is really important, but more so because it would just sort of perhaps shift some of the mentality around what's happening at the present moment in time. But I do also think as well, you would hope that this international break has come at a good time for Sunderland. That it felt like they maybe needed just a bit of a reset, a bit of an opportunity to gather themselves. And I know a few players have been away on international duty, but for the most part, you would like to think that it's given them an opportunity to really sort of ground themselves and hopefully attack these last 8 games with a renewed sense of purpose.
Yeah, and I do wonder, with that little bit of time on the training pitch, the opportunity for Lebris and his staff to have a little rethink. I do wonder if they might try a different formation against Millwall. I'm not saying he's gonna scrap his regular formation, because we know he likes to play that. But with the potential injuries, I do wonder if he could go 3-5-2. I know it's been discussed internally. That means you could have Sealt or Hjelde in the middle, and they could be sort of protected by Mepham and 09. It would mean playing somebody like Patrick Roberts at right wing back if Trey Hume wasn't fit, and it would mean playing Romain Mundle left wing back if Cirkin is definitely absent, which is looking increasingly likely. But that would mean Lebris would get to keep his favoured midfield 3 of Neil Job and Chris Rigg. You'd also have the opportunity to play Isidore and Mayenda up front, which is something a lot of fans have wanted. Again, you could play Alan Brown at right wing back if you didn't want to go with Patrick Roberts. You could also have sort of a back 5 of Hjelde, 09, Sealt, Mepham and Roberts if you wanted to slice it that way. So I do wonder if in a couple of these games towards the end of the season, we might see a few little different things from Lebris as he sort of looks to develop his squad ahead of the playoffs. Because, I mean, we've experimented with that 4-4-2, and it did work against Sheffield United at home, and it has worked in games, hasn't it, Jace? But I think back to Sunderland's last promotion winning campaign and being able to play 5 at the back, it does really help in the modern game, doesn't it? I'm not saying, Sunderland are going to sort of throw 4 at the back in the bin and revert to a back 5 for the rest of the season and go really like ultra defensive. But I wonder if it's worth exploring. I'm not saying that they're definitely going to like go hell for leather with it, but I do wonder if it might come in at some point.
Well, it's good to have options, isn't it? And I think the flip side of the situation that Sunderland currently find themselves in, obviously the downside of it is that perhaps it's difficult to maintain some momentum and to maintain that sort of that need to push on because the playoffs are secured. They're not going to make the automatics now, you would assume. So how do you maintain that momentum heading into a playoff campaign? The other side of it, like I say, is that it does perhaps give Lebris the opportunity to tinker with things with a little less pressure on the situation. You know, he's not having to go out and obviously someone will want to win every game heading into the playoffs, but from a numerical standpoint, in terms of the points tally, it's not absolutely vital. So, like you said, it is an option. It's an option that's available to him. What I would say in terms of the wing back options is that one thing that I would say about Sunderland's wingers is that I don't necessarily think you can fault their work rate. I think that, you know, one of the biggest things that I think Romain Mundle has over, say, Jack Clarke last season is that, and this is no shade on Jack Clarke either, by the way, but he really does graft in a defensive sense. Romain Mundle is willing to get up and down that line. He's willing to put himself about a little bit. And I think that in that sense, he wouldn't necessarily be, you know, unsuited to playing as a left wing back. Patrick Roberts, maybe a few more question marks around there, but he does put in a shift to his credit, you know. So it'd be an interesting one. And I do think that if he were to go to a 5 at the back and was able to call on Trey Hume as well, then I think it makes a little bit more sense. In it.
No, it definitely does. I wrote about this actually in a sense that if Hume is fit, you can bench Roberts. That means Mundle can obviously play quite high up on the left-hand side, and it's sort of that isometric formation, isn't it, where your left centre back can fill out to the left back spot when Mundle's on the attack. No, I think you're right to point that out.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting. It is going to be interesting, and obviously, like you say, that midfield three that he does prefer. I guess the big thing with that is that it's three, if we're including Chris Rigg in it, three very young players who perhaps needed a bit of a rest. I know Rigg and Bellingham have been away on international duty. Bellingham got an assist last night as well for England under 21s. I mean, it was the most basic assist you'll ever see. He's passed it about 5 yards to Ethan Nyaneri, scored an absolute worldie, but he's got an assist. And hopefully those three will, Daniel included, will be able to come back and just have a little bit more energy about them, perhaps be a little bit more rejuvenated, do you know what I mean? Because I think that's one of the things that we have seen perhaps in recent weeks, that Rigg, I know he's been in and out of the team, but Rigg especially was starting to look a little bit jaded, a little bit leggy. And Bellingham as well, as wonderful as he's been this season, he's obviously going to need some sort of rest at some point. Just obviously seeing their comment as well from Thomas Crandall saying, we never mentioned Niall Huggins. Do we know anything about him? Now, obviously the situation with Niall Huggins is that he's just injured, and it's a real shame because it sort of hits on a key issue, which is that if you have Niall Huggins to call on, Sunderland do have a wonderful deputy to Trey Hume because he was so good prior to his injury last season.
Yeah, he's a player I really, really like, and it's such a shame that we're not going to see him. You know, the same with the Elise as well, players that I really, really like and could definitely improve Sunderland's starting 11 and the versatility in the squad. But it's just a shame that he picked up that injury, and I don't think we're going to see him until like pre-season at the least. Maybe a bit longer. It's a shame for him as well, because I remember Phil Smith, our colleague at the Echo, who was actually recently married. We should say congratulations to Phil. He spoke to Huggins in the summer under Mowbray before the Mallorca game, where he was just sort of coming back to fitness after another long injury layoff, and he was really buzzing to be back. People, I think, forget how young these lads are as well and how much it affects them when they get injured. And to see him sort of to hit the heights in a Sunderland shirt where he scored that wonderful goal. I forget who it was against, but he scored that wonderful goal at the Stadium of Light, and suddenly everybody was talking about him as like maybe Sunderland's best fullback in terms of talent-wise, and then to get injured again is gutting, really, because he's a really, really nice lad and a good player as well to boot.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing you would say about him as well is that, you know, despite the fact that he's been sidelined for so long, Sunderland have seen fit to hand him a contract extension.
Yeah.
And I think that obviously in one sense, what that does is take the pressure off his recovery, and it allows him the time to properly get himself back to full fitness without the concern about potentially being out of contract and having to find a new club, whatever it may be. But more importantly, I think that I read it as a signifier of how much faith they have in him. And I think that there is a belief that if they can get him back to the levels that he was showing prior to the injury, they have got a real player on their hands there. You know, it's not obviously the extent of the injury is worse, but it's not a million miles away from what we saw with Dennis Cirkin last season, where it was obviously so frustrating that he wasn't on the pitch, but there was that continued belief that when he was back, he was going to make an impact. And then obviously we saw that, especially over the first half of the season with Cirkin, really did come to fruition, you know. So I think when Huggins is back, and like you say, it is going to be probably quite a while, but when he is back, I don't see any reason why he can't actually be knocking on the door to maybe try and displace, whether it be a Cirkin, whether it be a Hume, because like you say, when he was fit and firing, he was performing at a level that would suggest he has the talent to be able to actually, you know, be a first team player for something.
Absolutely. Should we predict our start 11s before we head off? I'm putting you on the spot, but I've got mine written down. If you want me to go first while you have a little think,
you go first, and then I can just agree with you.
So despite having teased a formation change, I don't actually think that's going to happen, because all I've been told is that it's been discussed internally, but that I haven't been told the result of that conversation. So it may well have been discussed internally, and Lebris might have gone, nah. So I'm working off that. So I'm going Pato in goal. I think Yelder's going to start left back. I think we're going to see 09, Mepham, and I'm copping out really here, but I've got Sealt/Hume. I think if Hume's available, he'll play, obviously, but I think he will go with Sealt at right back as opposed to 09. I think he'll go Neil, Rigg, and Job, and then I think he'll go Mundell, Roberts, and then I'm tipping him to bring back in Isidore to start, but he does love Eliza Mayenda as well, doesn't he? So I could see Mayenda starting. If Phil was here, he would be taking the Michael out of me, because I haven't really predicted anything there, have I? There's a lot of caveats, but yeah, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you just named Sunderland's entire squad there, haven't you?
Yeah.
No, I think, yeah, look, I'd agree with you. I think a lot hinges on Hume's fitness. If he's fit, he plays. It's that simple.
Yeah.
But obviously, there's no way of knowing that until potentially Thursday, potentially Saturday. It's as simple as that, you know. So, yeah, the Mayenda Isidore one is an interesting question. I think he'll probably bring Isidore back in. I think it's as well as Mayenda has done. I think that you can't overlook the impact that Isidore's had this season, and it does feel a little bit harsh to keep him on the bench, bearing in mind how many goals he scored and how wonderful he's been since he came through the door. The only other one I would perhaps flag, Alan Brown potentially for Rigg. You know, could he give Alan? I like what Alan Brown brings to that midfield. I like the application. I like the little bit of grit. I like the experience. And against a side like Millwall, might not be the worst idea in the world. So again, I'm not exactly nailing me colours to the mast here, but I would largely agree with you, with the caveat that maybe Alan Brown for Chris Rigg. But again, we're only going to find out when we find out.
Yeah, true. I would like to see him do that. I really would. I think I would have liked to have seen it against Coventry, but he just loves that midfield three, doesn't he? He absolutely loves them, and I can understand why. But I think that's certainly one to watch, and I wouldn't be adverse to that at all.
No, fully agree. Fully agree. Right, should we call it that, then, James?
Yeah, let's go and find something to write about during the international break.
Yeah, the joys of sports journalism. Yeah, so obviously keep across all Sunderland news on the Sunderland Echo. Me and James, you can give us a follow on social media as well. We'll be at the Stadium of Light on Saturday, full coverage of the game. And until then, we will see you next time.